Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for agreeing to come on the Always Andy's Mom podcast today and talk about your son, Corey.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, very good. Well, why don't you just start out by telling us about Corey?
Okay, yeah.
Maybe even pregnancy and what he was like as a little baby.
So I had a super normal pregnancy. Everything was healthy, went really well. My delivery went smooth. He, passed all of his tests. He was super healthy. We went home from the hospital. I think it was like 24 hours later.
Oh, wow. Quick.
And yeah, super quick. Everything went, really good. He was, just so cute.
Yeah. And first baby for you?
Yeah. Second.
Second baby. Okay. So you had one at home already.
Yeah. My daughter had just started kindergarten. So.
Oh, so there was a pretty
new.
Big gap actually.
Yeah. Yep. She was like a little mom, but she was really excited. So, it was good. And he was such a good baby. He didn't really, he wasn't very fussy or anything like that. And then, so he was perfectly healthy. And then about maybe 6 weeks old, I started noticing some like kind of small developmental physical milestones that he wasn't hitting. He was kind of more like sleepy. He would sleep a lot and we were doing like tummy time and stuff. And he wasn't really like trying to pick his head up or hold his head up. But I didn't really, it had been 7 years since I had a baby.
7. Wow.
6 years since I had a baby. So, I'm like, oh, he's just lazy. Like, I didn't really think anything of it. And then he was about 6 weeks old and he started getting what I described it as like a cough. Like I thought he was getting some kind of respiratory illness. And it was a Friday. So I called the pediatrician and I was like, hey, I really want to bring him in before the weekend hits, cause he's only 6 weeks old. So I thought, maybe since my daughter had just started kindergarten, maybe she brought something home to him or, something. So I went in and she definitely agreed with me. And she kind of noticed, which I did not pick up on this at the time. But she noticed that he was a little weak, than what he should be. So she sent us to like local, smaller branch children's hospital in our town, just to get like a chest x-ray to make sure he didn't have pneumonia.
Yeah. Cause she probably thought he was weak because he was just really sick from an illness.
Yeah. And she definitely noticed, like I said, at the time, I thought that I described it as like a cough. Cause he would do this, have this little respiratory thing, that sounded like a cough, every couple minutes or so, or sporadically. So we went to get the x-ray and at the time I wasn't sure, they didn't tell me a whole lot when we were there. They came in.
I'm going to pause you for just 1 second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There's some background noise. Do you have some bracelets on or something that's hitting the microphone, you think?
I think maybe
there.
Okay. All right. I think my necklace was hitting it. I will.
Your necklace was hitting it. Okay.
Forward. Yep.
It was a lot of background noise and I thought that's going to end up being really distracting.
Yep.
So I just thought we'll just take care of that right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
So we did the x-ray, and they came in and they had asked us to go ahead and go downtown to like the main campus because, they were kind of concerned with some findings on his chest x-ray. And that's all they really said. So,
So I'm sure you
went
thought
straight
infection,
there,
right? Yeah.
yes, like I was thinking like, oh, okay, so he has pneumonia, we'll go there, maybe antibiotics, IV, maybe deal with it. So we got there and kind of the same thing. They actually admitted him. The diagnosis was just general weakness. So they had admitted us and we were there for, I think 2 days. And I worked in healthcare prior to what I do now. So, I was very open to all of the residents coming in and, everybody has to learn. So we had lots of people in and out of our room for 2 days and nobody was really saying anything. They're just kind of the same thing. Like, oh, he presented 6 weeks old, general weakness, poor tone, stuff like that. And then it wasn't until the third day, I actually had a group of residents had come in the morning before rounds to do their physical exam. And they went out of the room, but they kind of stopped in the hallway outside of the room and they were like grouping together and talking about stuff. Well, they didn't close the door all the way. And I was standing at the sink right next to the door, like washing a bottle out. And I kind of overheard them. And I heard one of them say the word SMA. I had no idea what it was, didn't know what it meant. But then they started talking and they were saying things like, if he lives until he's 6 months old and if he lives to a year old. And so I obviously heard that. Yes. So I immediately just, broke down. And I just remember like running over to my phone and I did the worst thing you could ever do and Google it, obviously. And then, at the time, so this was in 2012. So I Googled it and in 2012, there was no treatment for SMA, just, preventative and comfort measures. So the life expectancy that you saw was age 2, the typical life expectancy. So I remember just breaking down in the middle of the hospital room. And a minute or so later, our nurse at the time had come in and she just, I felt so bad for her because, it wasn't her fault at all, but she was like, I knew you heard that, I'm so sorry. And so the doctors ended up coming in and apologizing. And then we kind of had a long discussion because I'm like, don't sugarcoat things. I need to know like what I'm looking at, what's going on. So that's when they kind of told me that a lot of the symptoms that he was presenting with, the low tone, the weakness, and then what they saw on the x-ray was kind of a bell-shaped chest from where he was belly breathing instead of, normal with his intercostal muscles. So they said that it was all consistent with a genetic disease called spinal muscular atrophy, and they wanted to test him for it. So obviously, we agreed to that. And so they sent off for the genetic testing. And in between that time that we got the results back, they did, so many other tests and he had so many pokes and prods and just so many other things. And we were there for a total of 42 days. So
goodness.
Yeah, it was quite a long journey for us. And we didn't actually get our diagnosis until I think almost maybe just a little over 2 weeks before he passed away. So
wow.
Yeah, it was, I don't know what the holdup was. I know at one point
took a long time back then.
Yeah.
It's hard to think now because now we're 9 years later and things are so much different.
I know at one point they were kind of like throwing around botulism because a lot of the symptoms for botulism are very similar to SMA. And they had said that, when they see it, they kind of see it in a cluster. And I think they said that they had like maybe 2 kids in the Cincinnati area who were treated for it around that time.
Okay. So you're just hoping beyond hope, basically.
Yeah. But then, ultimately they came in and they told us that, he did come back, that he had spinal muscular atrophy. And based on there's 4 different types of SMA, and, type 1 is the most severe, and they base it on when the symptoms onset and how many copies of an SMN2 gene you have. And so Corey had 2 mutated SMN1 genes that were essentially just blank. So they were missing. And then he only had 3 SMN2 genes. So he was a pretty weak type 1. So at that point, we got our diagnosis and we were kind of looking at where do we go from here? How do we go home? This is what we're dealing with. What are our next steps? And so we didn't even really get time to think about it because they were doing CPT therapy, kind of, patting his back and stuff to break up some secretions that he wasn't strong enough to break up. And at this point, when they were doing that, we had actually moved from a regular room to a respiratory unit, and he was on a BiPAP. And it was crazy. Now that I look back at it, it was so fast at the time, but now that I look back on everything and look back at pictures and stuff, I can just see in the pictures his regression. And it was just so quick, the way that everything happened from this, healthy, fat, chunky baby to, just a few weeks later, you could tell that he had lost weight and, you could just see he was tired and he was working hard to breathe. And so, at the time they were doing the CPT, the thought is that they broke loose some secretions that he just couldn't clear. And so he went into respiratory distress and we had to make the decision to intubate him, which we did. And so then from there, we were moved to the ICU.
Sure.
And we were in the ICU for a little over a week. And every couple days, we would look at his blood gases and we would look at his numbers. And when he went into respiratory distress, he collapsed his left lung. So he was on the ventilator. We were trying to, reinflate his lung, get that opened back up. And so we would do the x-rays every morning and everything was looking good. His blood gases were looking good. And so we would extubate. And then he would always do really well for about, 10, 12 hours. Everything would look good. And then he would just start to, regress again. So we would have to re-intubate him. And we did that twice. And so, the third time, the doctor kind of came in and he said, this is where we're at. We need to decide, where you want to go moving forward, because he may never be able to, breathe on his own, essentially, without being supported. So that was not a great conversation.
No.
Yeah. So I had to think about it really, really long and hard. And, for me, looking back now, it really just sucks, because in 2012, when all of this was happening, the clinical trial had just started, the human phase for Spinraza, which came to be the first ever approved treatment for SMA. So it was just, this much too late for him. So it just sucks so bad. But, ultimately, given how he was, and he was just so weak, and I just couldn't fathom putting him through that anymore. And you could just see it in his face that he was just tired. So, I told the doctors that, I need them. I remember the conversation we had relatively the same doctor that followed us kind of throughout the whole stay. I'm forever thankful to her, because she was very good with SMA, where, we would see some doctors come in, obviously when it wasn't her rotation, and they would try to start treatment and on, different things. And they would say, well, let me talk to, Dr. Leslie first. And then they would say, well, she said that normally that would be fine, but because he has SMA, let's not do this because, XYZ. So I was super grateful for her and her knowledge. And so she went off of her rotation this day, and another doctor had come in. And, I remember telling him, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if we're ready to try to, extubate again. And he's like, no, his numbers look great. I think now's the time. And I just remember telling him, this is the last time we're doing it. So, I need you to be sure that you think that he's ready. And so, all of his numbers look good. His x-ray looked good. And, everything essentially from a medical standpoint looked great. So we extubated, and again, he did well for less time this go around. It was only about 6 hours or so. And then you could just tell that he was starting to work harder to breathe. And so we ended up doing another chest x-ray, and his lung had collapsed again. So, so this time we decided that, we weren't going to intubate again. Cause, we just didn't want to put him through that anymore. So we had ended up giving him, just some high flow oxygen through a nasal cannula. And to just kind of see what would happen. And he did okay for maybe, 10 hours. When we got the x-ray results back that his lung had collapsed again, I think it was around 11 PM ish. And so he did okay throughout the night, but I mean, you could just see him just getting worse. And so by the next afternoon, they kind of told us that we should probably, call as much family as we wanted to come. So we had quite a few family members that stopped by, and it was a very, very hard day. I don't even know that I remember much of anything about that day, to be honest. I do remember the staff was incredible. I do remember that much. They actually, throughout the whole process, they were great, especially when we got to the ICU, because of all the equipment and stuff that's in there. You weren't supposed to eat and drink in the room. And, they had a family room, a couple rooms down that you had to go to, and I was not leaving. So there were definitely a few rules that were broken for me, which I was grateful for. Cause I wasn't leaving. And then, so the last 2 days, when we kind of knew where we were headed, they had a regular bed in there, so I could, just lay with them. And, and that's, I don't really remember much about, I know that a lot of my family was in and out of the room, and, I just kind of laid there and held him. And then I think it was around a little before 10, the doctor came in, and he's like, giving the nasal cannula and the oxygen is only supporting, and it's kind of stopping what's going to happen. So he's like, at some point, if you're ready, we can take it off and just kind of let him, let his body do its natural thing and see what happens. And so I remember hearing those words, but I don't think they ever registered with me, because, he had told me before he left, he's like, whenever you're ready, just let the respiratory therapist know, and she'll come in and, we'll take everything off and, whatever. And so when she came in the next time to check the settings, she had asked me about it, and I was like, yeah, okay. I guess we can, but I don't think it really sunk into me at the time, what that actually meant. Because he was just so weak and just so ready. So we took off the nasal cannula, and it was instant. His, sat started to drop, and then I think it was only 3 minutes later that they were able to call it. And he, so he passed.
I don't know that I would have expected that either as a mom.
I didn't. And even though, I look back at it and I know what was happening, and, I worked in an ER. Like I knew what they were telling me. I just didn't, it doesn't register
No.
at all.
And you just can't wrap your head around it.
No,
you just can't. When it's your own child, I mean, I think back, I was watching them do CPR on Andy.
Yes.
And I asked the question, is he going to be okay?
Yeah.
Honestly, what a stupid question to ask.
Yeah.
With what I know. I mean, there they are doing CPR. He has a needle sticking out of his chest. He is not going to be okay.
Yeah.
But in your mother's heart of hearts, you just are begging that it is. And you think it has to be. It just has to be.
It has to be. And I just remember like looking up and I'm watching the monitors and I'm watching the numbers go down and
you're like, no.
And I'm like, wait, like, hold on. Like this is not what was supposed to happen. Like what is happening?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
just so hard on your mama's heart.
It was very, very hard. And, when I look back, I don't know if thankful is the right word, but I am okay. I have learned to be okay with what happened because for a very long time I was questioning, did I make the right decision? Should I not have done that? Should I have tried to intubate him again? How many times should I have tried to do it? Did I give up too soon or, but I have come to be okay with my decision and took a very long time to get there, but I have come to be okay with it. And I'm glad in a sense that it did happen the way that it did, because, I got to be there and I got to hold him and, I was singing to him the whole time. And so I can't imagine a better way to leave.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And in that way, he did just sort of slip away.
Yeah.
Didn't he? And that's nice a little bit to know.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. And then
he wasn't struggling.
We had one of the chaplains had come in and he was asking us about almost immediately, which I know that they have to do that, about organ donation. And I was like frozen. I'm like, well, when I renew my driver's license every year, I always select to be an organ donor, but I've never thought about that for my kids. I don't ever want to have to think about that for my kids. But then I just kind of looked at him and I was like, well, of course, take whatever you can. So I'm also thankful for that, because, nothing then could have helped him. There was no treatment. There was no, I look at some of the older kids now who have type 1 and, they're trached and they're got, feeding tubes and it's so hard to grasp because cognitively they're perfect. They're super smart. And it's like, they're just living this life that's not fair.
Yeah. And I really relate to that because my friend Megan, whom I've told you about, and Megan was on the show. She's Willow's mom. She was on in May of 2020, and her daughter Willow died only 2 days before Andy. So we were in the same grief support groups, and Willow had SMA, and she was trached and on a ventilator and feeding tube, but was just bright and alive. And, she had a twin sister who could like talk for her, basically, you know what I mean? And so I've seen that. So hearing your story just reminds me of Megan's, because, she ultimately couldn't go on past 6, right? And she too, it's interesting because Willow died in 2018 and she was 6. So that means she was born in 2012. So she just missed all those brand new treatments kind of too, just the same way, but obviously must have had a slightly milder case than your Corey, because was able to, do better.
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure she wasn't on a ventilator as young as he was. She just slowly got weaker.
Yeah, since during our time right after we got the diagnosis, I remember one of the social workers had come in, and she had given me some type of paper. I'm not sure what it was, but it had, the foundation at the time, it was called Families of SMA. They have since changed the name to Cure SMA, but, she gave me this information. She's like, the families that we deal with who are affected by SMA, we've heard that this group is fantastic. You should contact them. And so I did ultimately contact them late that night, and I almost immediately got a response back, and they were just fantastic throughout the whole process. I mean, anything that I needed, they were sending me. They sent materials as far as research for me to read, and just so much stuff. And so after he passed away, he passed away in November, and that, I think it was maybe April, they held their yearly walk and roll. And so, my whole family, we were like, we're going to go to this, we have to do something. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we ended up going to the walk and roll. And from that moment on, I was hooked, because it was more than just a foundation. I saw that, like, they really were a huge family. And even though, I did not have a child living with SMA anymore, they still, greeted me with open arms and treated me so well. And so ever since then, I have been working with Cure SMA, and I actually hold a leadership position now. And so in the last 3-ish, almost 4 years, myself and another mom, we were working on the newborn screening in Ohio, and we were able to get that passed. Mm-hmm. And so now that we have a treatment, and we have the newborn screening, mm-hmm. and these kids are getting diagnosed early and treated, I can't describe the feeling, because, I get contacted by some of these moms, and they're like, I don't know how to thank you for doing what you did, because, now my child is alive and my child has a chance. And these kids, when they get the treatment, are developing like perfectly normal kids. And it's crazy to me, because I'm like, he just missed that by a little bit. But, from his story that I've been able to share, and, I've been to Washington a few times, and I've spoken to state representatives and congressmen, and, really drove home how important this was for newborn screening, so that we can get that early intervention. So if that is what it was meant to happen, I think I have found peace with it.
Right. You're not like totally okay with it. It's not like it's worth it, but if this had to happen, this good can come of it. Right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny. I just, I've been in pediatrics now for like 20 years. And when I started, our newborn screen detected 5 illnesses, and we only tested the reason you only did 5 illnesses, because you only test for illnesses that you can actually do something about, and that would that you could start treatment, some sort of treatment early in infancy that would change the outcome. So that's why it was really only those 5 things. And I can't even list them now. I mean, I can list some of them in my head, but I'm not going to even say them out loud. But as it got easier and easier to test, it had been sort of controversial as to how much money do you spend to try to do these rare diseases if you can't do anything about it anyway.
Right.
Right. So SMA would have been one of those back at that time, even when he was born. Like, would there be a reason to test for SMA? Not really, because you wouldn't have been able to change the outcome. And in some ways, I mean, I've talked to people, whose children die of sudden unexplained death of epilepsy. That one comes to mind. And that, would you have wanted to know just how likely that your child was going to die? Did you want to know way ahead of time at the very beginning? Would that have made things better in some way?
Right.
So for SMA, if you on day of life 3 would have found out that he was going to die for sure, would that have actually made your life better? Well, probably not. But things change as soon as you can do a treatment.
Yes.
Because when you can do a treatment, now it's a devastating thing to find out at 3 days of age that your son or daughter has SMA, but at least there's something you can do about it. And if you start that treatment before they have symptoms, holy cow, it's way better.
Yes, such a difference. I still, every time there's one little boy in particular that, I follow his parents on Facebook now. He was the first baby that was diagnosed in Ohio via the newborn screening after they implemented it. And I sit and I look at his videos, and it's just, it brings me to tears every time, because I'm like, I can't, like, this is so fantastic that you can do that. Like, you can do all the things that you're doing. I just watched him the other day, like hitting a baseball off of a tee and running and his house. And I'm like, that is incredible to me.
Yeah.
And that, makes it a little easier to live with, for sure.
For sure. So, because I know for me, I see kids that are going through mental health issues and maybe suicidal thoughts and things like that. And all that happens to me, like, I constantly find myself looking to the mother, especially, and just thinking so desperately, I don't want you to be me.
Yes.
And you can look at that little boy's mother and say, I helped so she's not me. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Because you just don't want her to be you. And for her son to have to go through what your son did. And if you can see those happy videos, it just, I know a little bit of you, I'm sure, has little pangs of envy sometimes that you wish it could have been. But your grieving mama's heart is just so happy that it's not, that she's not in your shoes. Right?
Yes. Every time.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it's crazy to me. And I sit back and like look at the differences from now until then. And, I just went to a leadership conference before COVID happened. And one of the genetic doctors got up and was talking, and he's like going over the death rates from the last few years from SMA, and you just watch these numbers just drastically go down. And he said at one point, he made a statement that, we're entering a world where SMA is no longer going to be fatal. And that just like blew my mind, because I'm like, you're right. It's getting that diagnosis for parents today is so different than the day that I got it. Mm-hmm. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy, the difference.
It's funny. Just a few months after I met Megan and learned about Willow, I get, like, every week, the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think it is, or no, that's the American Board of Pediatrics. They're different. Send out these question of the week to kind of for continuing medical education purposes. And the question of the week was about a baby with SMA and starting treatment. And I read the whole question and I just kind of started to cry, because I just thought of poor Willow and how, had she just been born a little bit later, when I'm like doing this question is totally different than the question would have been 6 years ago. They wouldn't even given me that question to try to, educate me on the treatments of SMA. It's just so different. Everything's so different.
Yes, it's very different.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
It's never gotten easier. through these almost 9 years.
That's what I was just going to ask you about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it definitely stings less because of all the advancements that I've gotten to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, talk about your other daughter and your daughter and what things were like with her, and you know what I mean, when you were going through all this and in the hospital and just afterwards.
It was a very hard time while we were in the hospital. She ultimately, I actually held her back in kindergarten that year because she missed quite a bit of school because around the time that we were in the hospital, it was flu season. So she, obviously being so young herself, was not allowed at the hospital, but only, I think she was allowed to come twice when we were in a regular room, and that was it. So for her, it was, at the time, I didn't realize how confusing it was for her. Mm-hmm. I remember coming home from the hospital. She stayed with my parents and my grandparents on and off while we were there because I didn't leave. So, for 42 days, she was basically without mom. Mm-hmm. And knowing that something is not right, but not being able to understand it. So I remember coming home when we finally came home from the hospital. That's the first place I wanted to go. So I remember I had to tell her, and I'm thinking, I don't know how to tell her this. I don't know how to tell her that her baby brother's not coming home because she just adored him. And I remember, telling her kind of that, he just got really sick and he had to go, live with Jesus and he wouldn't be coming home. And she was outside playing at the time when I kind of pulled her aside, and she's just like, okay, mom, it's okay. And then she, just went back on playing. And so I thought, okay, well, she's still young. It's, probably she doesn't understand what's happening. And so I kind of let it go. And I was sort of so focused on my own grief for a little while that I forgot about hers until it wasn't until, the end of that school year. Her kindergarten teacher had been great throughout the process. And, she understood what was happening. And, they sent her some treats afterwards and they were fantastic. And she had asked me to come in for like a parent teacher conference towards the end of the year. And she's like, every morning when we get to school, we do these journals and the kids write about something that they've done, that night or over the weekend, or, and it was some notebook paper lines. And at the top, there was always a space to draw pictures. And so she's like, normally I send these home at the, once we complete one. She's like, but I've kind of held on to Kylie's for a little while because I didn't know when to give them to you. So it had been a couple months since he had passed at this point. And so she handed me these paper journals and I started flipping through them, and I couldn't believe almost every single journal entry that she had. And this is a kindergartner, was talking about her and her baby brother. And she would write stories about what we had done the night before or over the weekend, but she still included him in it as if he was there. And then, some passages that she did, she would draw these pictures and she'd fill up the whole square. And it was all these, bright colors and abstract kind of images that she was drawing. And then there was always this little baby in the middle of it. And she would talk about how her brother was in heaven and how much she missed him. And I just remember that tearing a hole straight through me because I realized, I've been so focused on me that I forgot how it was affecting her and I didn't realize it. So we have this children's grief support group in Cincinnati that's put on by hospice. And so I had gotten her enrolled in it. And when we started going to it, I couldn't believe the difference in her that I didn't see it at the time, because she was definitely very affected by it.
Yeah.
And but
you know what she was doing? She was trying to protect you.
Yes.
Even at 5, it's so crazy how even young kids try to protect you. So she went to school where she felt like it was a really safe place, and she wrote about her grief. But she didn't want to do it at home with you because she didn't want to see you hurting.
Nope. She didn't think that I would see those. And it was crazy to me when we started, when she started interacting, they kind of broke the groups up by type of loss and by age. And so the group that she was in was with kids her age who had lost siblings and I think cousins or something along those lines. And so I had to drag her there the first day. She's like, I don't want to go, Mom. I don't want to go. I don't want to go here. I don't want to do this. And when we went to leave, she comes out of her group because the parents kind of waited in their own little room until they were done. She kind of runs out and she's like, when do I get to come back? Oh. And I was like, oh, did you like it? Do you want to come back? And she's like, yeah, Mom, these kids are like me.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow, she has gone this whole time thinking that she's the only kid, the only kid who has experienced a loss like this or her hurt like this. But, she didn't she wasn't old enough to understand that there are kids like that. It does happen.
Yeah.
And
because it's not really talked about.
No, it's not. And I'm so glad that I went with that group because she ended up doing it, participating in it for a couple years. And I feel like it helped her tremendously. And I even feel like, it helped me at times too, hearing about, they would do lessons and they would incorporate some kind of craft with it. Mm-hmm. And one of the crafts that they did actually stuck with me for a really long time. And, they took these little flower pots that they had gotten and they threw them on the ground and broke them into pieces. And then they gave them super glue and they had them on each piece. They had them write something or someone that they loved and something that, someone that's there for them. And so she had all these pieces with hobbies and with family members written on it. And then they had to glue them back together. And, at the end of it, they explained to them, your pot doesn't look the same as it did before. And there's pieces missing here and there, and it doesn't quite fit the same way it did. But, with all of those things inside, you're able to put it back together. And so I was like, wow.
That is really great that they did that.
Yeah. I was
because I feel like I had that revelation on my own at some point, but gosh, it took me a while.
Yes. Yeah, it did. And it was very helpful for me because, I was in a place where I felt very alone almost because I feel like, I know there's like a quote that goes around that says, someone who loses a spouse is a widow and someone that loses a parent is an orphan, but there's no term for somebody who loses a child, and people don't know how to react to you and they don't know how to respond to you. And I remember, yes, and don't talk about it. And I remember going back to work a week or so after Corey's funeral, and no one spoke to me for the first probably 2 hours that I was there. Nobody said a word to me. And then, finally somebody walked up and said, oh, I'm so glad you're back. And I just broke down and cried because I'm like, you're the first person that's talked to me. You're not going to hurt my feelings by talking about my son. It's
and I may cry.
Sadder to me. But, yes, but it's okay.
You're right.
And, to me, it's sadder to me now, 9 years later, because he's not talked about a lot anymore because, everyone else has gone on with their lives. Yeah. My grief is not front and center to them anymore. And, his 9th birthday was this past Tuesday, and the day is always hit or miss for me. Some days I'm okay. And some days it's just harder. And, this was one of the harder years. And I feel like it had a lot to do with, I started a new job a month ago. And so I haven't really gotten to know these people yet. I wasn't able to I wasn't able to take off work because, it's a new job. So I had to go, and nobody knows. So, Tuesday was just a Tuesday for them. Mm-hmm. But Tuesday was one of the worst days of my entire existence to me. But it's like, they didn't realize that. And I even had friends who at the end of the day, text me, and they were like, oh my God, I forgot, I'm so sorry. Can I do anything? Can I say anything? And they felt so bad. And I'm like, it's not your fault. It's not, your life has continued. It's so hard because I'm like, the more and more that the more years that go by, he's thought about less by other people. And I think that's the hardest part for me now.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm just at 3 years and I see that already. And it's just so hard. I mean,
yeah,
I think at work and just stuff, people just forget. They just forget that there are going to be certain things that are just going to still trigger me, because for them, like you said, their lives just went on totally fine. And there are a few people that like really still kind of hurt with me, and I think still remember it every time, but a lot of people don't.
Exactly. And it's hard.
Yeah.
I get a lot of, I have a lot of people say, when I do ultimately share with them my story and share what happened, there's been several times where I've gotten the comment, well, at least he was only 3 months old.
Yeah.
And it just takes me back every time, because I'm like, I don't think that, 3 months of memories is any easier to deal with than, 14, 15, 18 years of memories. That's my child. So I just think hard.
People feel like, some people feel like they need to try to find a way to put a positive spin on it, which I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. They just feel like, oh, I got to do something, because we're talking in this really dark, bad place. So I want to make there be some sort of spin. So it's oh, this is all part of the greater plan, or, at least he's not suffering, or at least he went quickly, or something like that, or at least he only had 3 months. I mean, it's this need to paint a little bit of a brighter picture, like to cheer you up somehow. Because I do feel like they're doing it to kind of, they feel like they should sort of try to lighten the mood somehow and make things a little better. So they try to put a positive spin on it. My dad is horrible at doing this. He does this to me all the time. It drives me crazy. He is always wanting to try to kind of cheer me up. And sometimes I just would love it for him to just be sad, and just please just don't. Because I end up not talking about Andy to him, because I know that he will try to somehow flip it around and cheer me up. And I can't handle it if I'm having a bad day. So then we end up not talking, which is not great, but it just ends up happening. I mean, that's part of my goal with the podcast is having people feel a little more comfortable sitting in the sad space.
Yes, because you have to talk about it. And, on Tuesday, I felt like I don't have a lot of people to talk about it to anymore, because they're not sad anymore. And I am, and I don't, it's hard for me to talk with my parents, almost for the opposite, because I feel like my parents still are very sad. Mm-hmm. And so they almost overwhelm me with their sadness, that I feel like I don't have an opportunity to express my sadness, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that makes it difficult for me.
Yeah, that is hard too. When you feel like you're comforting someone else.
Yeah.
Like, this is not my job to comfort you now. Yes. Your job is to try to comfort me.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it's different. Like if my daughter's having a bad day, or my husband's having a bad day, or my son, I can comfort them. But I feel like you get out of that little window, they got to turn to somebody else. They can't turn to me to comfort them. They have to get there support from the outside and then put theirs on me.
Yeah.
It feels a little selfish in some ways, but it's the way it kind of has to be.
Yeah, it is. And, I try to do little things, especially, for my daughter. So like every year for his birthday, either I will make or buy a birthday cake, depending on how I'm feeling. And at some point in the day, we'll light a candle and kind of blow it out. And I typically can never bring myself to eat it, but she's 14 now. She loves cake. So, so that's always good. But I actually, now I'm married and I have 2 stepkids as well. And so it gets a little harder because, they didn't know me when this happened. They don't have that connection really. So they're just excited about cake. And, my stepson this year, every 5 minutes after dinner, can we cut the cake? Can we cut the cake? And I'm like, I can't, he's 9. I can't express to him that like, this is a sad cake for me. It's not like, I'm not ready to cut it yet, but I still have to find a way to celebrate it because, it was his birthday. So,
and we've had cake too. So we've had 3 cakes so his favorite cake, there's this place, I don't know if they have it down in Cincinnati, but Nothing Bundt Cakes that they sell they're amazing cakes, right? They're amazing bundt cakes. Delicious. I'm doing a plug here and they're not paying me, but they're awesome cakes.
Yes.
And Andy loved these cakes and he loved the lemon. Loved it.
That's my favorite.
It's so good, right? It's my favorite too. So we have to he had to always go get the lemon cake. And in fact, the day before he died, one of the last things that I did with Andy really is we went shopping because it was his foster brother's birthday. And we went to the Nothing Bundt Cake store and got a lemon bundt cake. And it was the first time Andy had actually gone in the store, and they serve free samples, or they did before COVID. I'm sure they don't now. But he ate a free sample. This is great. He was so excited to be in the store and to pick out the cake. He's 14 years old and he actually skipped out to the car. He was holding my hand and skipping to the car because he was so happy to have this bundt cake. And all of my friends know how Andy feels about the bundt cakes. And so, the first birthday, I think we got 3 bundt cakes and then little buntlets, like little cakes.
Yeah.
I had all sorts of bundt cakes. The second one, I don't know. I had 1 or 2. This last year, 2 bundt cakes at my door. Lemon bundt cakes. And so one of them we end up having to stick in the freezer. One we'll eat, one we'll stick in the freezer. This year was really beautiful because his best friend came and ate the bundt cake. So that was nice. But I get nervous and sad thinking about the day that somebody doesn't bring me a bundt cake.
Yes.
Because going in there myself to get it will be really hard.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like I need the bundt cake every time.
Yeah.
Right. And I need to honor him and I need that cake. Yeah. But some of the things you just still can't do. And I guess it comes to the point where I'm going to have to ask someone to do it for me. Yeah. But I'm just going to kind of hope and pray that it just shows up.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny too. I almost feel like the bundt cake store needed a little bit of a warning, like make sure you have plenty of lemon.
Yes.
On the 21st of April, because there are going to be people buying lemon.
Yeah, I definitely get it. This year in particular, I ended up buying the cake instead of making it because, my work schedule and training is kind of hectic. And so when I went in to get it, the cashiers always make small talk and she's like, oh, whose birthday is it? And I'm like, oh, it's my son's birthday. Oh my gosh, how old is he? And it's like, it's hard.
Right. Because then you just go on and you just say, oh, he's 9. Or
yes, you just have to pretend it's okay.
I mean, that's almost like easier because then if you throw out there like, well, he would have been 9, but he died.
Yes.
Like, really, do you need to put that on the cashier? Probably not.
Yeah. And it's,
although there are some days that I would be in the mood and I will just put it on. I would.
Yeah. Yeah. And then along the same lines, it's sad for me almost because sometimes it is easier just to say that. And so, it depends on, now that I have been working at my current place for a month now, I have started to share my story. But, those first couple days, it's, oh, do you have any kids? Yes,
How many kids you have?
2 and 2 stepkids. And I just kind of leave him out of it because to me, it's easier to just slide past it than it is to sit and explain it and to get the pity faces. And then it makes me sad because I don't want to leave him out of it.
Yeah.
But people don't know how to respond to that. So
I know it's very hard. A lot of times now, it's funny because I still have my foster son, even though he's aged out and he's no longer in the foster system. But, for me, he's my foster son forever. So I used to say, when people ask me that question, I would say 4, 3 biological and 1 foster son. And then, but now it's like 4, 3 biological, 1 of whom died, and then a foster son. And it's way too complicated. So a lot of times I just say 3. And I think in my mind, I'm counting Andy. And then if they ask further, I can throw Valeriano in as the third one. It just depends on kind of the mood I'm in and where I really want to go. Cause it's just such a question that women ask other women.
It is. Yeah.
It's just like a natural question. It's like,
it is.
It seems like, so do you work outside the home and how many kids you have? That's like,
right.
Those are the questions you get. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Corey, with us today. Is there any little last tidbit that you would want to share, bit of advice that you've kind of come to over the last 9 years, anything?
The only advice that I really give other moms is that, as hard as it sounds, eventually your world continues to turn at some point. And that's hard to grasp because you think, well, no, it's not. How does my world turn without my son? But one day you just kind of wake up and it is.
Yeah. And I think it goes back a little bit to your flower pot analogy too.
Yes.
You're still a flower pot and you can still grow flowers in it. It's cracked and it's not as pretty as it used to be.
Yep.
But you can still grow flowers.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. We are always looking for new show ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, know someone who'd be a great guest, or have a show idea, please email us at marcy@andysmom.com. Be sure to visit the webpage, andysmom.com, for more content, including Marcy's blog. There you can also sign up to receive updates via email. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.